Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the Muslim Philanthropy podcast with American Muslim Community Foundation. My name is Muhi Khwaja, and today we're delighted to have on show Muna AbuSulayman. Welcome.
أهلا وسهلا.
So, congratulations on your Lifetime Achievement nomination with all the work that you're doing with Rias Consulting and previously with Waleed Philanthropies.
Well, it was such a lovely email that I got about the nomination. I didn't realize, living in Saudi Arabia right now, that this was, there was such an award, and I just thought it was a beautiful way to think about the philanthropists in our community, and being nominated is such an honor.
Yeah, of course. This is the first time we're doing the Muslim Philanthropy Awards and really want to showcase the breadth and depth of the Muslim community. And I think really what is part of that conversation are the Al Walid schools and the programs and centers that have been partnered all across the United States. So, for our listeners, do you mind sharing a little bit more about that work?
So I left Al Waleed Philanthropies in 2011, but at that time, one of our most important pillars was communications between East and West, or Islam and the West. And one of the things that was very important for me was to figure out, and of course this was post 9/11, ways of rethinking of the gaps between the Muslim community and the American community where I grew up. I grew up in the States. And so one of the people that I had asked for help was Dr. Jamal Barazanji from Virginia. And as you know, he is one of the most brilliant people in the world, Allah yarham. And we discussed forming a committee to look at some of the most important gaps. And we had 6 members, not all Muslim, half non-Muslim, but people that worked with the Muslim community, either in politics or in philanthropy or in education. And 2 things were discussed. One was the need for real Islamic scholarship in some of the most important universities, a way to have a pipeline of great scholars, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, a place where they can actually meet. And also, the other gap which we worked on was post 9/11, the philanthropic sector, as you know, was decimated due to a lot of concerns about the kind of NGOs that Muslims ran. A lot of them were, I don't want to say this, but it's like more mom and pop shops, people that wanted to help, whether in the
Sure.
US or back home. And it was a lot of goodwill, a lot of effort, but it was not institutionalized, or it didn't have all the legal coverings, and 9/11 exposed that. And a lot of people were hurt, either closed down or were investigated. And so there was a huge gap. And we created a program at the University of Indiana. And it was about how do we actually create, there was 5 years of getting fellows to go and study for a year philanthropy, whether they went back and worked in Muslim philanthropies or Muslim NGOs or non-Muslim. It wasn't an issue. It was about creating knowledge, creating a network of like-minded individuals. And ISNA was the organization that awarded. So we did not actually select, because we didn't think in Saudi Arabia, as Al Waleed Philanthropies, we would have the ability to actually select the most brilliant minds. And so ISNA, we developed the program, and ISNA carried on the selections, and it went on for 5 years. And I think all over the US right now, we have fellows that worked or that studied in our program that are working in the NGO and philanthropy sector. So this is one of the most important, I think, programs that were much needed, that we were able to help create, develop, and fund. And it's very close to my heart. Going back, we created 2 important centers for Islam West dialogue, one in Georgetown and one in Harvard. And it took us almost a year of working with both organizations to actually finalize the final program. Of course, all final decisions go through Harvard. We don't have any kind of authority over the actual center, but we had indicated what needs to be done. And what needs to be done didn't come from my head, didn't come from Amu Jamal's head. It came from this committee that carried on extensive focus groups and communicated with Muslim leaders all over the U.S. To figure out what is needed. And the money came from Saudi Arabia, it came from Al-Waleed bin Talal. But I was, and it's one of the proudest things that I think in my life, to be able to create an institution that will live, an endowed institution beyond our lives, for the next 500 years, 1,000 years, that would enable great scholarship in Islamic studies.
I think it's really phenomenal, the work that you've been able to do, and the foresight of endowments and awqaf and waqfs in Islamic history have shown the importance of establishing institutions. I'm sure you know, in Morocco, the Al-Qarawin was established by Fatima al-Fihri, and a similar mosque was developed by her sister, Maryam al-Fihri, and they used endowments. And so the ability for you to be part of something that is an endowed institution at places like Harvard and Georgetown and ISNA, I can see is very meaningful, and the impact of that will be profound through the next few generations.
And that was exactly the point. I mean, one of the things is that people did not do things that had sustainability for a long time. They would do a fellowship, they would do a professorship, but this idea of having something that is holistic, that looks at one issue and how to deal with it and make sure that it is housed, funded for forever, is something that unfortunately it was not part of the way that we did our work, or Muslims did work in the US.
Yeah, and I think your point about the mom and pop shops, like, well intended, they wanted to do great work, but didn't have the processes in place to professionalize their staff and to do all of these things. But now, being 20 years later from that time, I've seen a great transformation of the nonprofit community in the United States. And I would say it's in debt to organizations like ISNA and the fellowship that you had been part of. I'm one of the many alumni of those fellowships. And back in...
one person who was in Dubai once, and that was it. I've never actually met the fellows. And that was on purpose, because it's not about me. It's not about Al-Waleed. It is about, the Fellowship for American Citizens for the U.S. It's an American program. But I am absolutely delighted to actually, because this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to have people that would graduate and do something for the community, whether it is by leading by example and working in a non-Muslim, work, or actually creating something that would have a great image of Islam. And so, seriously, it made my day.
Great. And there's, I'm sure, dozens, if not hundreds of others that are similarly doing fantastic work across the United States and even the world because of the influence that you were able to have in those things. So again, seeing the work that you've been able to do is really inspiring.
Because it was on purpose that I would never meet. I don't go to the centers. I do not do anything with them. I do receive the newsletters, but it's, like I was telling somebody a few days ago that you do a lot of work. I'm seriously gonna cry. You do a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you hope that it makes a difference. But you don't know if it will or not. You just have to trust that you're doing the best. You actually work very hard to get the right people connected, funders connected with gaps that are essential to building a better future for all of us.
Right.
And then, so you're my second fellow.
Yeah.
I need a Kleenex.
No worries.
But anyways,
And
it's also
hopefully,
late in Arabia. It's 11 o'clock at night, so I'm at the end of a very long work day.
yeah.
But I'm a crier as well.
It's good to let it out.
I get affected very emotionally about the work that I do, the things that we've done. And the thing is, it's not only Georgetown and Harvard, by the way. There is one in Cambridge, and Cambridge does not
Nice.
graduate students. It is actually when we had done a lot of the meetings, we realized that we need somebody who works with academic research for political empowerment and advocacy. And Cambridge actually came to us and said, we heard about the programs that you're doing in Georgetown and Harvard, and we want to create a center, and this is a center that would work on these things. And we had already decided that we needed this, but we were thinking about the US. And of course, eventually it went to Cambridge, that part of the equation. So there are 5 centers all over the world that work together, that meet. We don't have anything to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
They are working together to actually enhance Islamic West dialogue on their own through academia.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And part of philanthropy, there's different types of philanthropists. So for you to be forward thinking enough to say, we'll provide the money, you guys can come up with a committee to develop everything else. But we know that these things take resources and we want to support that. Yeah.
What is this the community needs? How do you want it to be done? What
Mm-hmm.
are the most important steps? And I have to admit, working with Waleed bin Talal at that time, he was one of the very few people that was very progressive in thinking about these things as well. So it's if everything that ever happens is always about getting the right group of people together. And I think
Sure.
we didn't do that. We used to get a lot of good-hearted people together that had wanted to do a lot of work, uh, but then we didn't get the funders or we didn't get the thought leaders. But one of the unique things that happened with this project that we were able to get the thought leaders from Triple IT, the doers
Right.
from ISNA, the academia. But that was only part of the philanthropy that we have done. In the US, that was the biggest part. But we also, for example, funded something called Impact, I think.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit rusty on the names, but it was about sending young students to intern in
Congress.
Congress, yes.
Yeah.
And they were in a lot of trouble, financial trouble at that time. They were overextended, but it was such a great program. And the selling point for it was that they said whoever goes and becomes an intern most probably comes back, even if they don't go into politics, they'll become much more committed to work inside of their own communities, wherever that community is. And that was a great selling point. And so we funded them, I think, for 3 years until they were able to get better processes and better funding opportunities. And then we left them. They were able to work on their own. We also worked with Georgetown to create with UPF. I don't know if you know
Yep,
them.
of course.
United Projections Fund. And again, they presented a beautiful opportunity where they said social studies teachers are the #1 entry point for all Americans for Islamic studies or Islamic history for in 8th grade, I think. And I was like, okay. And they're like, well, a lot of people get wrong information at that age and it just grows with them. Americans who get introduced to
Right.
turns out in the US you have to have some kind of teacher training, and each teacher does something in different credits, some kind of very interesting program that only works in the US. And so Georgetown, our center there, hosted with UPF the creation of a module for social studies for 8th grade teachers that they can come into our center through the program that UPF developed. Again, all American, but we were able to fund them. So I have to admit, Americans do think, and I'm an American as well, by the way.
Yeah.
Americans think very proactively about solving issues in a way that is not the norm in many places around the world. We like to help out, but you will always find good organizations in the US doing good work, and that's very focused. And I do hope that my next we're going to be talking about next projects, is how do you increase funding into these good projects?
Right.
Through applications, through advertising. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while. Haven't come up with a solution, but inshallah.
Inshallah. So that gives us a good opportunity to talk about 3S Consulting and some of the work that you're currently doing as well. And you have a large following on social media, and you're in the space of media and just kind of communicating. So share with us some of the work that 3S Consulting has been doing.
So 3S Consulting is a Saudi consulting company that looks at strategic issues that we are dealing with in Saudi Arabia. So one of the things that, for example, that we've been working on very hard is how do we integrate the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. There are 17 of them that look at all the major issues that could help us have a better life for everybody around the world. And we took the Saudi part of that, and when we raised awareness on these things, we look at how can we work with companies to help them actually move or pivot into the SDG format for many reasons. Some people will do it because they think this is what is needed to be cosmopolitan or like worldly. But a lot of people start doing it because they realize they can actually combine doing good with economic benefit, so the economy for good. This is something that we've done for, I think, 5 years now, since the launch of the SDGs, and it's getting a lot of traction and you're seeing a lot of results. Another thing is, as I said, we're looking at how do you increase funding for good organizations, whether they are social impact, for profit, or just pure NGOs and NPOs. How do you help them not keep having to ask for funds? So part of it is the endowment, al-awqaf, but part of it is there has to be other ways of cross revenue making that they're not tapping into, or people are not creating for them to tap into.
Right.
I mean, fundraising is a great way of engaging the community and helping people to feel that they're also doing well, doing good with their participation, monetary participation. But it also puts a lot of stress on NGOs to keep on having to think about fundraising. And not all issues are very, shall we say, sexy. So for example, I mean, I'm talking about truthfully. I mean,
right.
I don't know if this is going to be good for the podcast. I'm turning the podcast into one of my talk shows.
It's okay. But yeah, I agree with you, because even as a community foundation, like, the things that I feel maybe more in line with people's idea of charitable giving for zakat and sadaqah, maybe like orphan relief, education, disaster relief, some social services and civil rights now.
Yeah, and young girls' education, for example,
Right.
young girls' empowerment. There's a lot of like things that gets people emotionally engaged.
Right.
Or if you personally had a problem. So, but that's not a sustainable way of making sure that the services that cannot be carried on by the government or by private companies for reasonable amount of payment are not available. And so part of it is, you see this in your area, you see this in the homelessness, right?
Right.
And it is incomprehensible. It is unacceptable that you would have that much increase in homelessness in a rich county.
Yeah.
Whether it is due to drug abuse, whether it is due to psychological issues, whether it is due to loss of jobs, it's just incomprehensible. And so for me, this is where the challenge comes in. When something just doesn't make sense, it means there has to be a shift in the system. And shifts in the system don't usually happen overnight. It takes years of work, whether it is understanding the situation, understanding all the components, bringing in all the right stakeholders, and then making sure that the funds that are needed are there without interruption and without continuous work. And we all know this in the NGO sector, that funders, there came a time, I don't know if it has ended in the US or not, But the requirements of reporting, the requirements for the grant
Sure.
asking, meant that only the biggest organizations were able to really tap into grants. It was so difficult to actually do that without having as a development officer that just works on these things, or a grant writer. And one of the reasons I don't like, for example, competitions, again, it's usually the organization that has devoted so much resources to their PR or development officers that could get these things, because this is what the funders, no matter what they say, this is what the funders keep on going back to, versus the organizations that are small and doing great work, but they are still struggling and they don't
Right.
have those resources, and so they miss out a lot. And I think that's one of the key components why we are seeing homelessness in San Francisco. We are seeing drug abuse that is not being treated well, or not being followed up to ensure, because with that you need like 20 and 25 years of follow-up with the person, not just through a voluntary AA, for example,
Yeah.
meetings.
We've seen,
So these,
especially in grant making. Sorry.
yeah. So when something doesn't make sense, you just have to realize there is a solution. And yes, the other thing is, I believe there's always a solution. I think that's, people give up on things, and I'm like, no, there's always a solution. You just have to work hard enough until you find the optimal solution. And once you find it, it might take longer than expected to solve, but it will be resolved.
Definitely. And part of the conversation that the grant makers and community foundations are having, especially with COVID-19, is how can we provide unrestricted grant dollars that you don't need to report back on necessarily, but kind of just, it doesn't have to be a whole 3-step form. It could just be simple reporting. And how do you make that easier on the nonprofit organizations to receive the funds and be in that pipeline?
So this is one of the things we always did at Al-Waleed Foundation, and this is since 2005, I would say. I don't know if they do it now after they have left, but I always made sure there is 20% of unrestricted operations that is for the organization. And
That's
that
great.
went against the trend at the time, which was about only funding programs. And that's when, remember when there was the whole thing about mission creep, it was due to people only funding programs, and you had to keep on changing your programs to enable you to get some funding.
Right.
And the mission. And I have to say, mission creep isn't always bad, because sometimes it allows you to understand where the sweet spot between funders as well as programs, and then figure out a way to have it sustainable. But most of the time, it was very bad. Most of the time, it was about you slowly changing your mission and the people that you serve and the ways that you serve them and their needs, because the funders who may not even live in the community have restricted you. And I'm glad that this is changing now, whether it is due to COVID-19 or it's, other reasons. It's good that it's changing.
Definitely. And we definitely want to empower organizations to help them build their own capacity and leadership development. And a lot of the times, organizations, like you said, maybe will chase the opportunity, but maybe not align it with their mission. So hopefully bringing more focus, and like you said earlier, like through focus groups and better understanding how they can serve their clients, their donors, their people that are involved with the organization to help expand the nonprofit services in different areas.
And you give that, if you're choosing an NGO, you have to trust it enough that it would use the unrestricted funds in a way that it would develop its own organization. I mean, do your work, do your due diligence, make sure that you're getting in bed with the right NGO that suits your goals as well. But then trust them, give them leeway to innovate, to expand, to change, and make mistakes. They will make mistakes. I mean, we also have to understand, I mean, when a business makes mistakes, it goes out of business and a few people have to, find a job somewhere else. But when an NGO goes out of business, it means a huge part of community is not getting certain services that might have been the only way. And we saw this, if we're talking about COVID-19, we saw this in the kids that stopped going to school, and we don't talk about that a lot. So whether you had bad internet, no internet, you didn't have the tablets, you didn't have the laptops, you didn't have an adult who was stable enough to actually make sure that you are, kids, you are on track to make the exams or to attend the lecture or to see the homework or not miss the homework. And so there was a lot of kids that actually fell through the cracks. And their mentors were also, that would have checked up on them. A lot of them were overwhelmed with their own children's needs, with their own,
Mm-hmm.
shift to distance work, etc. So if there was unofficial mentorships, a lot of them also fell through. So these kind of things that happen shouldn't happen, right?
Right.
If you had unrestricted funds for some of the NGOs, they could have immediately shifted, said, this is what's needed, versus taking 2-3 months, which is too long for many of those kids to come back and say, okay, well, now we have the right money. Also, a lot of the funds that went to COVID didn't go into services, went into research. I think one of the ones that was quite surprising when I heard Source Foundation moved, I think, $300 million from their mission into COVID research. And I was like, I understand the need, but also you guys are doing very important work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not everything has to be, I mean, there is life outside of COVID.
Right. And a lot of those issues that exist were then exponentially affected by COVID. So it showed that the need for funders and foundations and grant makers to actually double down on efforts and provide more resources. And thankfully for that, we did a crowdfunding campaign that raised $360,000 to give to mosques and also nonprofits in the U.S. So we were able to leverage the community to distribute those funds.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. I, I think that Muslim community, I mean, I saw the drives in Florida. I saw some of the stuff that was doing. I heard about some of the clinics that were open for free by some of the doctors, staffed by Muslim
Yeah.
doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of great stuff that came out of the Muslim community during COVID as well. Alhamdulillah.
Definitely. So I know, anything else that you want to share about kind of your work that you've done. And again, congratulations on the nomination.
Well, yes, it was lovely to be nominated. And you know, I I talk for a living, right? I have a TV show, and it's very interesting that when you are being interviewed or I'm being interviewed, that suddenly I'm also tongue-tied. Uh, it's now I understand my guests a little bit better. But I think what unites us is there's a lot of people who are doing good that are coming from different backgrounds, and your organization spotlighting the different efforts that are happening, bringing people together, networking, connecting them. I think a lot of good comes out of networks that are created, and I, salute you for the work that you guys are doing, and I hope, inshallah, that it grows more and more. Allah yuwaffiqkum.
Inshallah. I mean, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hosting you at the event. Another late night for you, unfortunately. But we're looking to hosting Hassan Minaj and so many other guests and the nominees for the Muslim Philanthropy Awards on Saturday, November 14th. So thank
Inshallah.
you again.
Inshallah.